Here we are back to Brighty at the Grand Canyon. This is the next chapter, Spider Web of Steel. Ooh, that sounds ominous. During the next few years, Brighty's trail from rim to river was pounded down by many feet. The split hoofs of mountain sheep and deer, the pads of cougar and coyote, the hooves of horses and mules, and the booted feet of men. Men felt the pull of the canyon not in the way Brighty did, for its winter warmth and browse, but for its brooding mystery. More and more of them came, explorers and geologists and students of birds and butterflies and bees, and sometimes an artist set up his easel on the bulge of rock and painted and tore up what he painted and began again. Brighty, on his treks up and down, greeted these adventurers with hearty brays and often took potluck with them. He spent several weeks with a bushy-haired artist, a giant of a fellow who was an excellent hand at baking. Brighty grew sleek and fat on Johnny bread and hot biscuits and sugar cakes. In return, he did some light packing, an odd assortment of brushes, canvases, and tubes of paint. It was a pleasant arrangement for both, while the artist daubed his colors, using his hair as a brush wiper, using his hair. Brighty was free to come and go. What ended their friendship was a freak accident. One evening, the man swung astride the burro to ride a up trail away to their camping spot. He had never done this before. Everything might have gone along all right in spite of the weight of the man and the upward climb, even the picture frame poking. Brighty's ribs was not too painful now that he had some fat on them, but a yellow jacket made a surprise landing on his rump and punched its stinger deep into its flesh. Ay-ya! 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 Brighty yowled in anguish. Up he went, skewering into the air, while the unfortunate artist fell off backward, almost toppling into the canyon. As if this were not ill luck enough, his big foot smashed right through the newly done painting. Even in his upside-down position, the artist broke into a rage. He jerked the picture off his foot, got up, and ran after Brighty, who was rubbing his hindquarters against a rock. He stood towering over the burro a moment, then gripping the painting with both hands, he lifted it high and brought it down crash over Brighty's head. It stuck there at a crazy angle like a clown's collar. "You jackass!" he cried, picking up a rock. "Get out of my sight!" Brighty needed no urging. The stinger was a poker of fire, driving him up the rocky ledges. It was hours later that a lone hiker, a little man with a butterfly net, came upon the burro sitting in the icy waters of the creek, crying in pain. The man put down his net, and when Brighty backed up to him, showing no intent to kick, he examined the situation and soon removed the stinger. Then he lifted the picture over Brighty's head and studied it, what it was left of it. He began to laugh. "Whoever painted this gaudy mess should have smashed it. But why?" he wondered aloud. "Why over the head of a poor little defenseless burro?" "Say, I know who you are," he exclaimed. "You're a bright angel. You built this trail." And he regarded the burro as if it stirred his pride to associate with so famous a character. Once more, Brighty's days were pleasant, although the butterfly man ate but 2 meals a day, and they were puny compared to the artist's. As payment, he asked only small favors, the carrying of a few jars of formaldehyde and sometimes a light bedroll, but in time the man began to act as if he owned the burro. He wanted him at beck and call every waking moment. If Brighty so much as played in the creek or ambled off to browse, the man made a great to-do. Had he not rescued Brighty, that ungrateful wretch? Some nights Brighty would purposefully wander into a side canyon to be alone, and when morning came he delighted in listening to the call of his name as it rang from cliff to cliff. Snorting to himself, he just rolled over and went right back to sleep. Any delay in his butterfly hunt infuriated the man, so he made a bell out of a tin can and a pebble and tied it around Brighty's neck. "Now," he said, clapping his small hands in triumph, "I'll be able to spot exactly where you are." But he had not reckoned with burro wiles. By practicing a little, Brighty learned to walk without the slightest nod of his head or the least sway of his body. Then the clapper and the bell hung silent. It turned into a regular game. The minute Brighty knew he was wanted, he tiptoed very slyly right behind the man or went off and hid. When the need for him was past, he came trotting back, and the bell tinkling merrily. One morning, however, it was not to be free of the butterfly man that he sneaked off. It was curiosity that pulled him. Deep in the inner gorge of his canyon there were strange thunderings. They belonged to neither wind nor river nor sky. They were sharper, louder than thunder, with long spaces of quiet between. Each time the rumble came, the very rock on which Brighty stood quaked. The tremors went running up and down his legs and through his whole body. What could it be? It was frightening and exciting, too. Brighty had to know. He turned tail on the little man, and once out of earshot, swung happily along, letting the bell tinkle as it would. Down, down, down he went, stopping only to quiver and snort when the racket let loose. Once in the inner gorge he half ran to the river, and there he burst full upon the scene. It almost made his ears leap out of their sockets. Across the 400 feet of water, the opposite shore was alive with mules and men and tents and rigging of all kinds. And more mules with great planks strapped to their sides were footing their way down the face of the wall to the little hive of activity. Brighty trumpeted his excitement. His eyes darted from mules to men and back again. Then all of a sudden a white cloud of smoke belched out of the black cliff above the scene. A terrifying explosion followed, with rocks bursting into the air. Brighty felt the world shake beneath him. A steamy sweat broke out over his body. He ran for fear the smoke and rocks would leap the river. Heart pounding against his ribs, he hid under the green umbrella of a cottonwood tree. He stayed there a long time until the roaring of the river told him the explosion was over. Then, cautiously, he crept back to the river's edge. Nothing much had changed. Men were still moving about like ants busy on an anthill, and the mule train was still angling down the wall. As for the white smoke, it was gone, leaving in its place a gaping hole above a great spilling of rocks. Fearful yet fascinated, Brighty could not tear himself away. For 2 days more the explosions continued. When they finally ended, the busyness of the men increased. It even reached across the river and tapped Brighty on the shoulder. What he saw on the third day was the cage swinging over the river toward him. When it reached his shore, a workman began unloading a wheelbarrow and big white bags. Done with his unloading, he wiped his sweating brow with his bare arm and looked around. Suddenly he spied the burro, and his face broke into a smile. "Hey, you must be Brighty," he yelled in a pleasant, booming voice. "Come here. You and me are going to build the bulkhead to hold the new bridge. That old cage will soon be a goner." In spite of Brighty's fears, curiosity was strong in him. He took a step forward, eyes and ears showing great interest. The workman turned out to be a nice fellow, particular too. He studied the texture of the sand down the river and up in the washes. "Too silty," or "too coarse," he would say, testing it between his fingers. At last, on a side canyon made by Phantom Creek, he found some pockets of sand he liked. "Just right," he shouted. He coaxed Brighty into packing load after load of it. Then he mixed it with the cement from the white bags and built a bulkhead. Meanwhile, 2 big cables were pulled across the river. To Brighty, they looked like the beginning of some huge spider's web. He watched by the hour, watched brave men dangling in rope slings anchor the cables high on the rocky wall, watched riggers work themselves along the cables, fastening hanger rods in place, watched the floor planks swung out, then eased into the web, watched big rolls of fencing unfurled and fastened to the side rails. As the web grew, men scrambled over it and under it, and some seemed to be held in it like flies. Week on week, the thing grew, and the steel of it shimmered in the sun, and the wind tossed it as if it were a spider's web. Late one afternoon, Brighty was sitting on his haunches, his gaze on the swinging bridge and the men painting it. There was a look of yearning in his eyes, as if he longed to cross the bridge to see what was on the other side. Green grass? Mesas to thunder across? Little long-eared creatures like himself? The roar of the river shut out the lesser noises behind, the hooves sinking in the sand, men's voices, mules snorting. Not until the party was full upon him did Brighty start to his feet. There we go. That was the end of that chapter. Back with more later. Bye.